I'm alive, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. This is our Tuesday, September 12th, Board of County Commissioners work session. And we're going to begin with an application for our P&Z Commission. So, Chelsea Clark, thank you for applying and welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So why don't I start and just perhaps just tell us why you're interested in serving on the P&Z and what you think you might bring to the commission.
Sure. Well, generally, I'm very interested in participating in Pitkin County and being a part of the civic process, and specifically P&Z. I have a background in land use and development, and so I think that I can add expertise to particularly working with specific planning and zoning applications within the county. And I'm also a lawyer, and in my work in doing real estate law, I value the importance of well-written law and well-planned legislation, not necessarily in the form of ordinances, but just general policy that has a long-range impact. And I understand that the importance of making sure that what's written in the law as it is today makes sense years to come, and that the decisions of the commission are made with long-range impact in mind. And so I think that I can contribute based on my knowledge of seeing things that are well built and well planned, and also wisdom of seeing things that aren't working well and reading law that doesn't work well and doesn't serve the county. So I think that my background in land use is particularly useful to a planning and zoning commission. And I'm not particularly interested in working on the city planning and zoning. I thought that might be an area where I could be involved, but I think that the county as a whole is a better venue for me, because I like to look at things in the broader scheme of how things are interconnected in the state, and how this county works with other counties, and how Pitkin County is just special and needs to be protected to maintain its uniqueness and its specialty.
Good, thank you.
That was a beautiful answer.
Great. Other questions?
I just have a question.
Addie
I
and Steve?
see you have a background working with both law firms that we work a lot with on the P&Z. Do you think there might be any issues for conflict of interest with you with either Garfield and Hecht or with Gideon?
I would evaluate each case on an individual basis, but at the time that I worked at both of those firms, I was not a lawyer.
You were a clerk.
So technically, under the ethical rules of professional conduct for a lawyer, I don't believe that the conflict applies. But if there was some sort of personal conflict of interest between me and a former client of either of those firms, I would, of course, make that notice everyone immediately and make everyone aware, and then abstain from anything like that. But I don't have a great deal of existing conflicts, as it were, because I just graduated from law school last year, and I don't have a large Rolodex of local developers that I work for at this time that I foresee creating any conflict.
And I also want to thank you for all the other work you do in the community. You do a lot of work with very valuable nonprofits in the Valley, and I really appreciate the effort that you put in there.
Thanks. Yeah, I was really honored to be asked by Michelle with Aspen Hope Center to do some of their contract work.
Yeah,
So
I think that's great. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah.
Steve?
Absolutely. Being on the P&Z is a pretty large time commitment and study commitment on some of the issues. They probably read more than we read on a lot of the bigger things they work on. Do you have any problem at all with making the time in your life to be able to be at the meetings regularly and do the preparation for them?
It's a great point that you make, because I learned early on in law school not to be intimidated by large books, and to the best way to get it done and eat the elephant is one bite at a time. In my personal life, I don't have a lot of other commitments that would take up more time. I think that I'm at a great point in my life where I can serve on a board like this, because I'm not married and I don't have children, I don't have pets. But the only thing I spend my time doing is either working or exercising, which is what a lot of people do in Aspen, and I just spend a lot of time doing that. But
you can always run around with the P&Z packets,
Yeah.
Making soap.
But I'm not intimidated by a lot of reading, and I am a nerd in that respect, and I don't mind. But I understand that it is a commitment of both being here in person twice a month and then also doing your homework in advance. And if you talk to people who know me, they know that I come well prepared to events where I'm required to speak and give an opinion.
Okay, thank you.
Rachel?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for applying. And as Patty has said, thank you for your work in the community. I wanted to drill down a little further on some of your perceptions about growth and the land use code and things like that. Have you ever attended any of the P&Z meetings?
I did several years ago before I went to law school, so in like the 2011, 12, and 13 phase of my residency here, yes.
Okay, and so you're familiar with the concept that we have a caucus community input from various reasons and individual caucus master plans, and their guidance documents are not, written in concrete as the letter of law. We have balanced the larger county needs as well. But say, for example, the Aspen Area Community Plan, urban growth boundaries for affordable housing should be within urban growth boundaries. Do you believe in upholding the urban growth boundary?
That's a tough question because I haven't done a lot of reading on it lately, so I'm afraid to comment without doing a great amount of due diligence on it.
Okay.
Can you repeat? Like, do I think we should uphold it?
Yeah, obviously urban growth boundaries anywhere have a lot of pressure to say, well, we can't get all of our needs here. We need to start urbanizing outside those boundaries. Affordable housing has been one of those issues of dire need in our community, and yet do you start to ruin that scenic landscape you talked about earlier?
I look at it in the context of what you just spoke about before, is what is the community's feedback on that, because you are taking surveys of everyone's general input, and then I would compare that to the long-range plan and what's already been established and adopted as the plan for future growth, and balance those two out, and depending on like the urgency of the need presented, I would evaluate it in a balancing effort.
And we've just finished some work with updating our energy codes, which will affect building within the planning and zoning, and are having some discussions about the transferable development rights. They can really accomplish a lot for preserving land, but then other neighborhoods end up with the impact of even larger homes, perhaps, and discussing what is the appropriate home size for a base level, or for if you can add on TDRs. What is your general philosophy towards growth, and how good are you at saying no and acting under pressure when everyone comes in that I just need a little variance here and a little extra there?
I'm a stickler for abiding by code, and as it's written, I wouldn't grant or I'd recommend variances. I think that the TDR program is so unique to Aspen and to Pitkin County in the way that development has evolved, and sometimes you're correct, it is manipulated. And so in the instance where I would see TDRs being used to manipulate what seems to be inconsistent with the long-range plan, I would probably adhere to the plan and the prescribed pattern of growth rather than creating exceptions based on a manipulation of the TDR system that is intended to work to benefit in accordance with the plan. It seems inconsistent.
And then one last follow-up.
Off the top of my head.
Yeah, that's okay. You are ahead. What is your general philosophy regarding growth and development in a county like Pitkin County? It's traditionally been a very slow and managed growth county.
I would continue to adhere to that policy. I'm a pro-growth person, but managed growth and smart growth and slow growth, not just for the sake of business, because then it ends up creating problems down the road. So I think that Aspen has done well as a highly regulated, and Pitkin County, I suppose I should say, has done well as a highly regulated county, and its benefits to its residents. So I think that maintaining that slow growth, managed growth, is an excellent way of approaching planning and zoning.
Thank you very much.
Greg?
Just one.
Hope I didn't get too political on that, but try to be a non.
Everything's political. Let's be real.
And I'm not political, so I'm sorry if I.
I'm wondering about the energy efficiency component. We're all talking, we're watching places around the country going toward greater energy efficiencies, looking toward net zero, for instance. I'm wondering if you have anything to say or know about that and how that might be incorporated in our own planning and our own codes going forward.
I think it's a great cause and of great importance to not only like Pitkin County, but on a national and global scale. So I'm interested in it also. And its application starts like with GrassRoots at home and everybody doing their part, including the governing boards adopting policies. But I'm also really pragmatic and practical, and I like to see how things pencil out on paper and the economics of whether it actually will be feasible and the timelines for that. So I support, and I'm a big proponent of energy efficiencies and adopting them at the government level, but I also want to know how that pencils out on paper first before I'd say yes or no to a specific policy.
That does it. Thank you. Yeah.
Any other questions? Do you have any questions for us, Chelsea, or for staff?
Yeah. I had one, comment that I've seen, and not so much in Aspen, but as a young person in the community and as a female, watching boards of mostly men.
I noticed that too when I looked at
and I think that's fine. That's always been. But I noticed your B&Z board is all men at this time. And maybe it would benefit from a little female influence, if you will. But I am really passionate about serving in the county in any capacity, and P&Z piqued my interest the most. I'm a full-time resident here and homeowner here in town, so I think I would be a really good fit to be continuously involved and just better serve my community this way.
Yeah, good
Great.
point.
I'm excited if you
Thank
choose
you.
me.
Great. Well, thank you very much for applying. We
Great having you.
do have one other applicant that's coming in, I think, next week.
Yep, I
And
understand.
then we should be able to get back to you hopefully in the next few weeks afterwards.
No problem.
Thank you. Thanks very
Yeah,
much.
thanks for all the work
Appreciate
Thank
you
you.
guys do as well.
Thanks a lot.
it. Thank you.
John, did you have any questions?
No, I'm good.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, we're going to get a Carbondale to Crested Butte Trail update.
Uh-oh. Did you get my message?
No scars. No
I left you a
bruises.
phone message.
Well,
Have
we
the
can find
lady
out
called
about that in
me?
a sec, Patty.
Before.
Oh,
Yeah.
so, thanks. I'm Gary Tenenbaum, the Director of Pitkin County Open Space and Trails, and next to me, playing with the computer, is Lindsay Utter, our Planning Manager. And first, Lindsay will give you kind of a update of the public meetings, and also, since we're on TV and not everyone was there, just to give you a quick way to get on our website
Thank you.
and look at the storyboards and to look at some of this work. And then I'll come back and go over some things that we've been talking about with some of the board members on some of the public process potential changes.
So, as you guys know, we had 2 open houses last week, one in Redstone, one in Carbondale. They were both very well attended. We had about, over 130 people in total. We went through the presentation with their consultants, which was videoed in Carbondale and will go on our project page this week. We're also working on getting the history presentation on the project's page as well, so that members of the public can view that as well. We've had about 44 comments come in already, which is a lot for us at this point, frankly. So Friday, everything went live on our webpage, and so the public can click. The PDFs of the boards are on here, the PDFs that were at the open house right here. They're also a hard copy in the Redstone Inn, so if people in the Crystal Valley would rather go look at them in person, they can also go there and look at the hard copy of the material with the survey. So they can also view the PDF online, which is loading. Probably don't need to look at this.
The website, just ostprojects.com.
Yep. So yeah, everything that was printed out on the walls at the open house was either left at the Redstone Inn in a hard copy, or that is available online. We also have created a We created a story map, or we used a story map, which is a software, part of our ArcGIS software. This is the first time we've used it. We're kind of excited about it and hope to use it in the future on other projects, but basically it sets up interactive maps on our webpage as well that the public can click and look at the different data points. So again, overview tabs are there, overview of the historical route information is there. So this is very high level, not as in depth as the overall presentation that we'll put up there, but it will go through the Utes, the county road, the Rock Creek County Road, the different rails, and then Highway 133. Then the public can also go to Exploring Trail Alternatives, where at the top all these numbers represent the segments that the trail was divided into. So they can click on the number, the map will take them to the segment, and then they can compare all the different information around those segments. So it'll zoom around the map. So if they want to focus on one part of the trail or all of the trail, they can do that. And then if they want all the data that populated those summary tabs, they can go and click through and get our consultants' information and zoom in on what they want more information about. They can click on the polygons, and it'll pop up the summary of those polygons that the consultants gathered. They can also look at, they did a landscape disturbance, so looking at what is existing and what are the existing impacts in the valley. They can also look at the CPW data, so this is all the CPW information around winter range and lambing and calving areas in particular. Then they can also look at the vegetation data that was gathered. The cultural tab is a summary of what was found. It's not a map. And then the same thing with engineering. So they can go through, look at what the engineers gathered segment by segment, what were the different cross sections that they used to create their estimated, well, the biggest thing really is the costs, but looking at on the ground what they saw, and then they can click and learn what were the typical cross sections they used and learn more about those typical cross sections. And basically that all populates this stuff here, the summaries.
So, Lindsay, on each segment, can you provide comments on each section?
Yep. So back to the main page. So there's links throughout here to take you to the survey, but you can go to the website, click on the survey. It will prompt you to enter 3 demographic questions, and which here I can quickly show you. But the short answer is yes. Yeah. You can either do an overview of your thoughts, or you can go segment by segment. It's an open-ended text box. So it's not like vote this or that. It's we want your thoughts on that segment.
Yeah, great.
So.
Somebody was concerned that the boxes looked so small. And I said, that doesn't mean you can't enter all of your comments. It's just the box when you first pull it up.
Yeah.
You can keep scrolling down. Yeah, I said we aren't limiting you to 5 words or less. You can add, and we want to hear as much comment as you have.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
So this all went live Friday. So we are now, this morning I was at the Redstone Community Association. Thursday we're going to the caucus, Scenic Byway. I'm just scrolling through my mind of, we're going around, whoever will have us, to show them how to do it, how to comment. And then Gary is going to talk about the schedule, I think.
Yes.
Do you have any other questions about any of this right now?
Steve?
Go back. Oh, sorry.
Steve, then Greg.
Lindsay, can somebody download a whole page? I mean, some people have written quite a bit already, just in terms of writing letters, and could they copy those right into the links on the comment page?
Yep. Yeah, you could copy your letter into the survey, or they could submit them directly to us as a comment. But in the survey page, where it popped to? Here, I can show you real quick.
Try not to bias right now.
Yeah, you could copy that into any of this general thoughts, and like Patty was saying, this will scroll down forever. And then you can, none of these other ones are required, so then you can do general thoughts, or you can go in segment by segment, and share your thoughts about what you would like to see.
Perfect.
So.
And also, if you do submit directly to us, it gets counted as a public comment. I mean, we will just keep them all as public comments. So, if somebody just doesn't want to do the survey and doesn't want to cut and paste, they submit the public comment, it still comes to us, and it will still get recorded. You will see all of those.
Greg?
First of all, this is very impressive, and it's so great to see it's being used. I think it's going to be a very useful tool, and thank you for taking the effort to make it. I think it's going to be very useful, helpful. I just wanted to look at your historical thing again, just for a quick historical travel routes. That first picture that popped up, it says Mount Newman. Did you see that, George, in the bottom? We were trying to figure out what we could name it for George for. I just thought I'd point that out.
Well, we no longer see a Mount Newman anywhere, so shall we just rename one of these mountains?
George would want you to rename it Mount.
Since I lost a vote on the Newman Center. Rachel?
Very, very obscure. Like, where does it say?
Similar to Greg's comments, I think this is a tremendous body of work, and it's something that will become a reference piece for people in the Valley for decades to come. I mean, this is like a historical society document or project you'd see in a museum. So I really appreciate all of that. The kind of comment that I've been getting a little feedback or just gleaning is the timelines we have going forward from here are starting to seem really tight for the public to absorb and really understand this body of information that's taken you a half year or more to put together.
Well, and that's what I was going to go into next.
I heard that too.
So if you didn't, I just wanted to get all the questions on this piece before I go into the public process. So if anyone else has any questions on this piece, cool. So the public process, yes, we've heard from board members. We haven't gotten any direct to staff, but we've heard from board members from the Open Space Board and some BOCC that they're starting to hear comments that there's a compressed timeline for this. It is a large amount of information. It's pretty impressive when you start going through this information, because the amount of environmental data that has been collected is quite impressive, and it does take time. So, we've been talking about it internally and with some of the Open Space Board members, and we're presenting to you guys to extend the public comment period to October 30th. And that would basically give another month for people to truly be able to get through all this data and give a thoughtful comment. And so, we felt that, that would work. It will push the rest of the schedule back, but, our goal is not to push this. This is, we do this all the time when we put something out and people need some more time, we'll give it to them. So, and this also then changes the October 17th meeting with the town of Carbondale and the Open Space and Trails Board. We would like to keep that meeting and have that meeting be more of a discussion than a decision point. Because one of the things is you'll have till almost October 17th for everyone, for all of you to go through it, town of Carbondale to go through it, their elected officials, and the Open Space Board, and it'll give you guys a chance to discuss this project in a public setting so people can hear directly the comments that you guys are thinking and how you're going forward. So that is, it's an option to keep it going, and I want to get some feedback on that. But then the public comments would continue to October 30th. From October 30th, then we would take all the public comments and draft a plan, and the draft plan would then come out at the joint Open Space Board and BOCC meeting on December 12th. And that would be when we reveal kind of a preferred alignment that you guys can talk amongst, the board members to determine where to go. And then we would release it for public comment. We would do no public comment during the holidays. We do it all in January of next year. And so This would push it probably to our quarterly meeting in March or late February, mid-late February, to come back with a potential alignment that we move forward with. So that's kind of how the schedule would change. And so, for us, one of the things we want to say is we have received some comments, but the reality is we're also receiving some comments through the website, and they're really thoughtful. We'd like, we knew this would have some controversy. So allowing the public process to actually proceed so everyone gets a chance to voice their opinion on this would be really important. And this is just the first public session, because then there's a lot of different, as John Peacock likes to say, there are many bites at the apple on this one.
Many rocks in the jar.
We'll have another public comment period coming up when you get to the alignments. That'll get more detailed on, potentially where we're thinking of putting this. So, we want to get thoughts from you guys, because if we get the head nod of October 30th, we'll put a press release out. We'll let people know, and we'll let people know at the caucus that everybody has more time.
Yeah, I think that's a good decision. There's such a tremendous amount of data to try to digest in this. It's sort of overwhelming when I first look at it. So to allow time to really have people have the opportunity to work through it, I think is valuable. And pushing it off just a few more weeks, I think, is not going to hurt the overall process. I'm not seeing a need to keep our October 17th meeting with the town of Carbondale, because I don't think that would be very fruitful, since we won't have the opportunity to have seen any of the comments or the information. And when I thought about that the other day, I guess my original thought and intent was to have our joint open space and trails meeting with BOCC in Carbondale, just because it was the location made more sense, because that's where most of the comments and interest was. But at the time, I really wasn't thinking of including the town of Carbondale trustees as part of that process. So for me, I think we could just cancel that meeting, wait till we have all this information, and then if we want to have another public meeting, we could do that as a joint meeting, use Carbondale as a location. So those are my thoughts. Other thoughts? Steve?
The public perception is that this process is kind of being railroaded
By some.
through them.
By
and
one or two people.
If we cancel a meeting where the public could be there and be listening to, even if it's our preliminary comments on what we are thinking on the different segments and alignments and whatnot, I think that would be opening, like stirring a hornet's nest and making some people upset that we're making it less transparent and more closed.
I could see that if it was happening in isolation, but if it's being announced at the same time that the overall schedule change is being announced, and that it's being announced that that meeting is being canceled yet rescheduled, it shouldn't cause that reaction. But I see what you're saying.
What's the opportunity to reschedule, is the question.
Well,
With Carbondale.
And the open space and trails, and us.
Well, right now, we have the December 12th meeting scheduled as a joint meeting between the Open Space Board and the BOCC. So that is scheduled.
Okay.
And so doing something additional on that one would take some big scheduling. Carbondale was not necessarily included in the December 12th meeting. So it was, kind of seen as that's a way for Carbondale to kind of give their feedback. And we were also, just to let people know about the public meeting, we were going to invite Gunnison County and the town of Crested Butte too. But
Yeah, and again, I see Carbondale as just a location because of the proximity to the trail. The town of Carbondale trustees will have ample time as a cooperating agency to provide their input to us and provide their comments as a board and as individuals. So, I don't see that we're we're sort of pushing this down people's throats at all. In fact, we're giving them more time to comment. And so for me, it makes sense not to have a meeting before we actually have all those comments in and we've had time to really look at them. I don't know so we're not losing the ability for the public to participate. We're just pushing that down the road a little so more people have the opportunity to comment. And in that meeting, they'll have an opportunity to listen, and I'm sure as all of our joint meetings will have public comments available.
I'd like to sit down with Carbondale, with the Board of Trustees. I think that they are critical in this decision, and whether the timing is, I'd hate to say we can't do it on the 17th, we can't do it until 2019 by the time all of our schedules match up. So I think we should really give great thought to this before we cancel that and see what we want to have as a discussion point at that meeting.
I agree with Patty. I'd like a little more time to think about it. I was thinking that would be valuable input, and for so many people in the Crystal River Valley, that's their Aspen, as it were, to so many people up here, and you try to let your opinions be known through both governments, Pitkin County and Aspen, and there's a lot of crossover, and I just kind of think that there would be a lot of community interest in the Carbondale area, that this is an important trail system for them as much, and we were partners on the beginning of the trail system that got us up to BRB, and so I see including them in a bigger role, as Patty is mentioning.
I got one idea would be to move the October 17th meeting till after the public comment ends.
Yeah, exactly.
If we could
Then do something in November. If we could figure out a way to
Good
get
luck.
a joint meeting in Carbondale in November, I think we could see if we could push that into November. I'm looking at John because
we have such tight schedule coming up. It's the problem.
Yeah, we canceled the meetings the week of Thanksgiving, but what I would do if that sequence of conversation makes sense to the board, then let's see if we can find an appropriate date. If not, we may need to swing back and keep this October 17th date. But it seems to me it would make some sense to keep the sequence of conversation as we've laid it out, if we can make the schedules work. And I understand that's a kind of capitalized if.
Both the I and the F.
Yeah.
Steve?
I was curious how many of the Carbondale trustees attended the 2 open houses, if any? Well, I know that the mayor did up in Redstone.
I think Ben.
And maybe they are, also how many of our OST board members attended the meetings? Because people were maybe thinking that the October 17th meeting was a time when they could learn more about it and not be making a decision, but a part of their learning process, which can be a pretty steep learning curve on this. There's so much to digest.
Well, all the open space board members came to the public presentations. And so the Carbondale, I know the mayor was there. I thought Ben Bonfac was there, but I can't say for certain. One of the town trustees, but we'd have to look to see that. And so, for us, it is an educational opportunity, and it is a way for the public to interact directly with you, because, one of the things at that public meeting that, trying to directly comment to staff is not that, valuable, because staff can't take if you tell me something, I can't write it down and be perfect about remembering it. Sometimes they want to speak to somebody, and so talking directly to the elected officials is the most appropriate way to go. So, I would propose going with John's is trying to find a way, if we could do a change in the schedule after the public comment, just to bring the boards together one more time before anything gets released, and we can work on that. And otherwise, October 17th, we can show you a lot of the comments to date, and so you can see comments to date. But the reality is it's obviously 2 more weeks of public comment after that.
So, Lindsay?
So we also reached out to Carbondale about having time at one of their meetings to talk and present prior to the 17th. And what we got to was we were going to provide them a packet for their packet of information. We could ask them again if there was opportunity now, if there's an extra month to attend a meeting in person. So it wasn't, I mean, they were going to get information before the 17th, at least from the board level.
So one other idea, I guess, just listening to all the comments, is perhaps if we can't find another date in November that would work, we could keep the October 17th meeting and use it just as an additional informational
Yeah,
meeting.
Yeah, that could be really
with everybody
valuable.
at the tables. Yes.
Yeah, you'd have a lot of people, and people sometimes would be interested in coming in at least to listen.
And would we at that meeting, were we planning on having the consultants there? Or could we have the consultants there?
We could, yeah. We were going to have them come to the joint meeting where we released a
Right.
draft plan.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, we could add that to the 17th. We could ask them to still attend
That would
and
be
then
great.
make sure they're there on the 12th, and then whatever the meeting is into 2018.
Yeah, I mean, that may make sense because one of the comments, a few of the comments I received was a few people, I have to qualify this, a few people thought they would have the opportunity to have an open session, questions and answers, and share that information with the whole group. And so the October 17th meeting could provide that opportunity for Q&A with our consultants there.
So a full presentation again, or
No, I would just sort of very abbreviate it, and then we could work out in terms of the how we want to orchestrate it, but more of an opportunity to see where we're at, perhaps some updated information, and then allow the public to ask some specific questions and have staff and the consultants there to be able to respond. So everyone who's there can sort of be able to participate in that discussion.
Well, and they're also, with all the BOCC and Open Space Board and even Town of Carbondale in the room, Q&A will make more sense.
Yeah.
Because then you can listen to it.
All right, Greg?
I was just I'll second what you said. I think that's the way to go. The frustrations I heard were certainly that people wanted to ask a question and didn't feel that the forum didn't suit them. And so this is an opportunity to give people a chance to speak in a forum and in a discussion with everyone and be heard, and I think that'll be very helpful. And there'll still be time to comment after, and they'll have time before to go on this. And I think this comment on the website is going to be extremely useful for everyone, and we should be doing our best to encourage everybody to check in on this before the 17th of October so everyone comes prepared. I'd really love to see an effort to make sure anybody who has any question has already checked in and really gone through this, because it's such a great tool now.
And I think it's a better process, because if we did Q&A at those other meetings, what we see is the loudest voices make the questions, and the people who are quiet will not ask them. And that's why we did it in the open house format, is because, first of all, we could have been there till midnight with 80 people asking if all 80 wanted to really ask questions. Secondly, what we have seen is the loudest people start making comments and not questions, and this phase is really about education, getting you to know the project, understanding the project, so you can make a qualified and a very informed comment.
That's a
Okay,
good
so
point.
does that make sense, sort of keep that October 17th
Yeah,
for
see what we can do.
part of that public process?
that.
We'll do that.
All right.
Thanks,
Good.
guys.
Anything else? Great, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is
So I heard we
encouraging.
were starting building this summer, so just so you know.
No comment.
Good choice.
Okay, let's see, what's next?
Mr. Kinney.
Future agendas?
Airport.
We have an airport update.
Airport update, there we go.
We were just talking about our airport.
Plain people that are out there.
No, we were talking to the people in Lake County about our airport and their airport. All those plain people. We don't have plain people around here. But no plain people in it. By the way, that was a great presentation you made at the ACRA It was great. And to have airport staff there was great. It was really a great event. Thank you.
I heard the same.
Yeah, he was
I wasn't there,
exceptional.
but I heard it in the grapevine that it was
It's too
really.
bad, you guys. It was a great event.
Yeah.
And the hailstorm and the thunder and the lightning and the gondola closing twice. And
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's
an experience.
News. We got a great topic.
Georgie's waiting for you to give him the okay.
Oh, no, you're ready to rock and roll, John.
I'm sorry.
You're ready to rock and roll.
Okay, thank you, sir. Good afternoon, members of the Board of County Commissioners. My name is John Kinney. Great opportunity to serve you as the airport director. Got a brief airport update today on a couple different things, but one that did not put in the slideshow presentation. There's really no graphics, but hopefully we can create the opportunity for a presentation where there'll be heavy graphics for you. And that is the return of the airflow, airspace capacity to Pitkin County Airport.
All that in the paper.
Good
I really have
job.
to take my hats off to the Federal Aviation Administration and the amount of energies that they put into re-engineering this departure and arrival process was quite staggering. So it went all the way up to Washington, D.C. and the state of Washington, where is the region for our particular place, as well as the folks all down in Denver. They really put a lot of workshops together. Several of the teleconferences, which were on a weekly basis, 50, 60, 70 people, all the airlines, FAA Command Center. So it was really a very, very, very high priority. I've never seen a response like this in a non-accident environment. So I think they're very sensitive to the fact that they found out that there was more liability being assumed by the Federal Aviation Administration as opposed to the pilot in command of that aircraft when they execute turns than they ever wanted it to be. And so that's why they had to do an immediate timeout and come back. And short term, they did some things which helped us get through the summer months. Medium term is what they just did, is they're going to return the airspace. But long term, they're really going to be putting in quite an extensive GPS, global positioning system, navigation system that will allow the controllers to actually see all through the valleys in an extended period of space, probably about 25 miles out. So it's going to give them a lot more capability. I think it's going to also lower the ability for the aircraft for when it has to make a decision to land or not to land, which will reduce our delays. But that's about a 3 to 5 year mark out, and that's called RNP, Required Navigation Program. Still silly titles, but it's basically navigation that's inside the cockpit, that's tied to the GPS satellites in the sky, as opposed to the 1940s technology, the ground-based technology that we have in most places around the country today. So very good news. And the invitation in terms of the heavy graphics, if the commission has an interest, I could extend an invitation to the local control tower chief who's acting right now. But they could give us a graphical depiction of how the aircraft were going in and out of the airport and now how they're coming in. It's not a big change, but it's pretty fascinating to see. It's a little mini air show up there almost on a daily basis by the number of terms and complexities that they do compared to any other airports that I've ever seen.
Patty?
Yeah, I'd like to see it. I just don't know if we can work it into our schedule. I think it would be very informative for us. But I also want to know, did this new FAA decision go out to the press? Because we had so many calls from concerned citizens when it came out the first time that they were cutting us back. I want to make sure that people know, because of the efforts, and John, thank you for all your effort, that we've been able to address that, and I would like that good kudos to come back.
Yeah. I did see one newspaper story about it myself.
I haven't seen it yet, so.
But I appreciate your concept, and I think as much as anything, the ACRA would do a great job of getting it out through their membership if you sent them a short email, and then they have that blast email list.
John, could you do that? That would be great.
Yeah.
He's got a great rapport with the ACRA people.
That'd be good.
And before I leave this, I just want to acknowledge the work that John did in convening the multiple players and stakeholders in
50 to
this
60
decision
on
on a pretty regular basis. So
I can't even imagine.
that was a really good effort, and we appreciate the work that the FAA did, and appreciate the work, John, you did to convene the stakeholders.
Greg, did you have a
Thank you,
question?
Yeah, just wondering, is it possible for that demonstration you speak of, was that going to be in the tower, or is it something we can have videotaped and posted online just as an informational piece for the public?
Greg, it would be here in a PowerPoint presentation, and whether it's available for online, I could find out.
So maybe there's a way we
Well,
can.
well, if
We
it's-
televise it,
Yeah.
and it'd
So
be
it's televised,
available
okay.
then online through our video. Yeah.
Steve?
I'd like to see it.
John, the other day I was walking by the airport, and I was actually walking on the little berm where there's a very nice path over by the general aviation area. And so I was observing the planes landing and taking off, and was kind of up looking down on it a little bit. So I observed it better than I maybe ever have. And one time there were two planes that took off. It seemed to me really close to each other, and they were both taking off, like one, and then a minute later another one took off. And that made me wonder if there's a difference in kind of the headway between planes when they're both taking off in the same direction. Are they allowed a little closer spacing in that case than if one's taking off and another one's coming in, which I presume there would have to be a little bit longer headway between them? So is there a difference between whether the planes are taking off or one landing and one taking off?
Yes, Steve, if they're both taking off in the same direction, they can launch them quicker, as opposed to if they're doing the head-to-head operation. So they might have also been wanting to form up for a formation flight later down the road in the airspace. But yeah, that they can, as soon as they clear the runway, the next one's cleared. In terms of they rotate off the ground, the next aircraft is cleared to start its takeoff roll. So they can do them pretty quick if there's nothing inbound.
And so sometimes do you actually stage that to get a whole lot of planes to take off and delay somebody from coming in? Or if one's anywhere near ready to land, they would kind of get priority to come in and land then?
You know, if you have, say, 7 lined up for takeoff, and there's no one coming inbound on the arrivals, as soon as those aircraft rotate off the ground, they'll do it at different points down the runway just based on their weight, performance, and a variety of other things. As soon as that aircraft clears the runway and, it's 100 or so
Next
feet
one's
off
out there. And,
launch the next one.
okay, so
is what
it
they're
seems
allowed.
very efficient if you can do it that way, just move a whole lot of airplanes real quickly
Really can.
in that circumstance.
You definitely could launch more than one a minute, without a doubt. So you're correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So I want to talk to you about a couple things today. And I'm sorry, as a typo, it should not have said parking update. It should have said contractual update at the very bottom there. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the environmental assessment, some things that we've been discussing with the community that I know you're aware of, but we're also having a meeting tomorrow night for the Aspen Highlands, and John, help me out, the group that's just above the airport. I'm having a
West Buttermilk?
West Buttermilk?
thank you area tomorrow night at their homeowners association. They want to get up to speed in terms of what's happening with the environmental assessment. So some of this information will be shared with them, but then also the passenger experience flying into Aspen, and then just the theme of balance and the character of the community in terms of developments at the airport and the contractual updates. So we used this the other day of just telling folks where we are in the environmental assessment process. The exciting part is we're getting near the end of the conclusion, but it also is that really critical point, as you know, where we need to hear from the community. So the original EA process was 2. It was a very large project, west side development, condemnation of land, proposed condemnation of land, relocation of Owl Creek, a second FBO, a parallel taxiway, just an absolute mammoth project for our size airport. So we repurposed that entire environmental assessment at the board's direction, and it is now much simplified, much smaller, and much more streamlined. So as you know today, really the EA goes down to 2 items, a new terminal building and the runway relocation, allowing those larger new generation regional jets. And the punchline to what has come out of the environmental assessment that is located in a variety of places around town, including the library, including the county offices down in Basalt, including the airport, including Snowmass, town of Snowmass, their town hall as where people can review those documents. But the punchline is really that there was no significant threshold, federal threshold exceeded with the exception of 1.5 acres. And some people may look at that and go, wait a second, we got a lot more questions than that. And that's a fair remark, but that really gets to the last bullet there. And what is an EA and what is not an EA? And, I really applaud the Board of County Commissioners before I got here. You really wrapped a public process around this environmental assessment. You really tried to make it so it wasn't viewed as just being jammed through the community, because a lot of times EAs are done about 6 months to 12 months and not really understood. But the awkwardness of those is it doesn't really allow that community dialogue, that community discussion, because you're scripted by the FAA for 23 very specific things that you must study. So the fundamental questions that the community wants to know are not even on the table. So it gets to be a little bit of a frustration. So we're going through that process, and we'll talk about a little bit more about that in just a minute. But we're going to give this presentation to a few folks because I think this is really what some folks really want to see of what's coming next if this EA does move forward, and are we obligated or are we not. But what could the airport look like in the future? Excuse me, I think you're very familiar with this. This was the lead design of a proposed new terminal building. This is shown at 80,000 square feet and approximately 8 to 10 gates up on the upper portion where the aircraft are parked. But very aesthetically pleasing. The community wanted the openness. They wanted to capitalize on the views, but they also wanted a circulation element right up front, but also softened with a lot of landscaping. So I think we hit the mark there. This is the interior view of baggage claim, great circulation element. There's also the very open and brightness component to it. These are 25% design, so if you're saying, wait a sec, where are the doors and where are some of the other things? TSA screening checkpoint, you're right, they're not there. So one of the things that we wanted to know, folks to know is the passenger experience really is a differentiator amongst airports. You see that in every magazine out there. You see that everywhere you go. So, you look at airports, they've really become shopping malls. Mm-hmm. They're looking for dining experiences. They're stressing a sense of place. So when people get off the plane, they're in the terminals, they know where they are. They also are seeking out the travelers themselves, street pricing, but also they want healthy food choices. They want modern conveniences. They want connectivity that is fast, that is secure, and they want green initiatives. So these are some real opportunities for us if you decide to move that environmental assessment forward into the design phase. We just recently, John Peacock, myself, and Rich Engelhart, and Ann Driggers, and Chris Padilla out at the airport controller went out to San Diego to take a look at a couple different things out there. There was specifically a creative finance funding opportunity that we saw. But some of the things that we saw, these were some of the green initiatives that they were doing with the carbon offsets, the charging stations. You're not only seeing those at airports, you're seeing them at shopping malls. It's just becoming what people are expecting to do. The public art component really, I think, was exciting. Here's some kelp reaching up to the light of the terminal as it would inside the ocean, but you don't see a tremendous amount of advertisement. You see a focus on local art and local artists. The convenience that we talked about, people want the connectivity, especially with the greater dwell time that we have with the diversion and delay factor. What our strength, they come here, but it also delays them from getting here and leaving here. These are some of the things I think really resonates with our folks here with the pet relief area. John opened this door and said, come here, so I came over and he said, check this out.
You want to feel at home.
I thought that was
And John's going to clean it.
But it looks just like a regular restroom from the exterior of walking down the terminal. And these are the type of unique concessions. You can see in the foreground the footprints in the sand that they're trying to duplicate there and the terrazzo tile. But this is the type of thing that I think that would be a very interesting concept to look at for Aspen Airport if they continue to move forward. To get a pedicure, get a manicure, get a whatever type of massage you're looking for. Wine bars, very popular inside airports, as well as these full-service coffee units. So concessions have really become a major component for airports, because the business case is the lower that you can make your operating cost to your airlines by offsetting non-aeronautical revenues, such as fees coming from concessions, the airfares go down. And that's something that we just have not had an opportunity to leverage. So you've been in a lot of airports as well as I have, the long-term and short-term things that folks are looking at. Switching over to the runway, again, looking down the future, if there was an opportunity for us to proceed here, this really, I think, would be the most compatible aircraft at Aspen, Pitkin County. It's about 110 seat, can go up to 140 seat. Basically, this model is CS100, is a 110 seat, and it's a game changer. You now could reach any one of these destinations nonstop. No longer would the flights at Aspen Airport be tied to the hub and spoke banking system, because you would go directly from New York into here, San Diego into here, Seattle into here, and you could flatten out the flight schedule completely and not have those peaks from 7 to 10, or 7 to 9 and 11 to 2, and so it would be a real change. They're roomy inside, but they're not too big. So in terms of the next process, in terms of the public comment, we're encouraging the community. The time is now. We want to hear from you. This is not decision time whether we go forward or not go forward. It's just checking the box with the Federal Aviation Administration in terms of the environmental assessment, clear the terminal footprint, as well as relocating the runway over 80 feet to accommodate the larger regional jets or fully meet Group 3 design aircraft, which retains scheduled service as we know it today with jets. No action in terms of the runway would mean you go to Group 2, which takes you down to 79-foot wingspan, which means the 19-passenger turboprop aircraft. So it is a big decision point. 2 meetings, one September 25th here in the county library in this building here, this room here. The other at the town of Snowmass, same time on the 26th, the following day. And 3 meetings, public hearings before this body on the 10th to 25th of October, as well as November 1st. Getting back to the EA for just a second, here's the one component that I think people just need to be aware of, that it's out there, and if you do take it to the next step, this is what it would involve. This is where the substantive community dialogue is really going to take place. And I think that this is where the questions that have been on a lot of people's mind that we have not been able to answer for a variety of reasons, because what the EA is and what the EA is not, basically outside of its scope. What does it mean if you move the runway? Does it mean the size of aircraft? And it means what size, what type of aircraft, and how many, and just how big are they going to be? And what about the terminal? What is the optimum size? What is too big that would overly perpetuate growth? What size could restrict growth? How do you optimize the passenger experience? The runway, the FAA has a very, very large voice in that. But the terminal building is exclusively rests with this body here as a huge key differentiator. No jetways, I think, is the one decision that has been uniformly from every meeting we've been at. So this is actually a CS100. I wasn't smart enough to superimpose mountains in the background there. So
that's snow, right?
Think of it as a thank you. It's a snow day. Thank you, Patty. So that's a CS100 and what it would look like looking outside a terminal building without jet bridges. So.
Second story.
1.5. Yep. Not quite, a little more than 1, but not quite the 2. And the last slide, in terms of the contract operations, we have our new parking operator in place, Laz, and they're doing a very good job. I think you're going to see increased revenues is pretty much what's going to happen, and it's going to be through efficiency, accountability, and automation that they're bringing in. The new restaurant is up and running. They had a few hiccups here and there with some equipment components, but I think they're working through those, and they're also working through some of the challenges of just getting recruiting of staff. We have a pending custodial provider that's going to be coming back to you folks. It's been a little bit of an increase, a large increase in terms of the custodial component, largely due to volume of what's happening at the airport. In the last 2 years, we're up between 74, depends on what scale you use, but if you split the babies between 74 and 91%, you're over 82% growth at that airport in the past 24 months. Staggering, utterly staggering compared to any other airport. Most I've seen out there, another airport was 13%. So it is a staggering increase.
Well, you've done a great job with that.
What's that?
You've done an impressive job with that.
Well, yeah, thank you. You folks had this in motion long before I got here, but the zip code doesn't hurt. And then Phase 2 of the check bag screening system, that was that $1.9 million project that you approved. So that was more conveyor belt systems and some additional CTX, which are the huge minivan size equipment from the TSA to put more capacity through the baggage screening areas behind the scenes, because you were leaving just with one airline alone, small one, 400 bags a week were being left behind because they just couldn't keep up with the volume. So we're entering into that second phase, and it's really conveyor system driven. So that pretty much concludes the update on the airport.
Great. And next week, again, open public sessions here on Monday and Snowmass Tuesday.
2 weeks.
2 weeks. 2 weeks. Great.
25th and 26th.
All right. We need to keep moving. Quick question, Rachel?
Yeah, thank you. I just got back from the Club 20 meetings, and we passed our resolutions for the session, and there was one on airports, and I think others may know this already, but from what we're hearing with the federal commission on top of it, they're not going to allow any increase in the passenger facility charge this year. They're not going to do that. Club 20 is supportive. We've been supportive. But the bigger thing was Commissioner Raybeck from Moffett County has been on the State Aeronautics Board. He had a handout about passenger facility charge, and I was I guess maybe I had gotten the wrong impression, but his handout from his airport contact said that you cannot use passenger facility charge on any revenue-producing portion of your airport. So not for restaurants, not for parking, not for shopping. And I was like, wait a second, I'd already heard you couldn't use it for parking, but how do you separate out these functional parts of the terminal? And is that your impression as well, that in terms of rental car booths, we can't do that? And so we're keeping the segregated funds of the revenues from the leases to pay for their portion of the building, and the FAA will not match us on those portions, and then we can use our passenger facility charge for the runway itself or other things. Is that accurate?
Yes, historically, FAA grants of any type of FAA funding is not to be used for revenue-producing components. So you physically separate revenue-producing, non-revenue-producing, common use space in your terminal buildings.
And the reason I'm asking is I was just thinking that as we go into budget hearings this fall and are looking at this larger project, if we could, and I think we've seen it in the larger spreadsheet, but perhaps really segregate out, these are the revenues we have for, from revenue producing things. These are our passengers facility charge, and what the revenue sources are, and maybe asterisk what they can be used for as we go forward with this project.
Right, and so Rachel, but we can definitely do that in our current state. So when you guys approve a lease for a vendor, or we have a long-term lease, like in the case of the FBO, those are types of examples where we're drawing another revenue source that should be paying for the capital improvements and operations and maintenance of that space. One of the challenges we're going to have in budget is we have a little bit of a chicken and the egg thing going on.
Yeah, we don't have the space to lease yet.
Yeah, and as John was pointing out, there's a lot of possibilities, but those possibilities are really going to be defined through our community discussion about what kind of and how much space is available for the rental and revenue generation versus the non-revenue generating space. And so that's going to be our dance over the next probably couple of years of design and figuring out what's appropriate for the community.
And what will perhaps end up being significantly less advertising revenue if we're moving in the direction of more public art, less advertising, and other shifts there.
Correct.
Okay. Yep. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks, John.
Thank you.
John P., future agendas.
Yep, and I will try and be quick on this. Couple things, just want to confirm for you guys that we are going to be doing the topping out ceremony on the 19th. We are continuing to be a little bit ahead of schedule, so we'll be doing that at lunch. We'll be getting some pizza and some drinks to share with you all in attendance, staff in attendance, and most importantly, the crew that's been doing the work on the building right now. So Just wanted to confirm for you that that will be on the 19th, and so we'll be providing lunch. And then I think we had talked about this last time, but I missed in my notes the outcome. We had another joint meeting scheduled with the city of Aspen for October 3rd. And I think it was, we were putting in on the quarterlies as potential dates. I'm assuming right now that one's probably a little close to the last one that we had, and we should be removing that.
Yeah,
Is that
I had
correct?
that on my list. I can cross that off.
Yeah.
Yeah, unless there's some, the one thing to check in, I would say, is if there's any joint budget issues that we would need to discuss at that meeting.
It might be early for that, but.
Yeah, it's October. But yeah, I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I would put in there.
I would anticipate there's probably going to be some conversations we need to have around the housing budget, but I don't know that we'll be ready by that October 3rd meeting.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's all I had for future agendas.
Patty?
I have one on September 27th, item number 4. We have an amended open space and trails bylaws.
Mm-hmm.
Did we discuss that?
That has been in the works for some time, and so it was discussed quite a while back when we went through the reorganization of open space and trails, and then one of the steps was to go back through the bylaws to update those. The Open Space and Trails Board did a lot of work on those.
So it's like
and-
a cleanup.
Yeah, it's a cleanup and changes. When we went through the reorganization, we identified there were some areas that looked inconsistent between the home rule charter and the bylaws, and I want to say our county code, but there were 3 documents that are contracts, that's what it was, that we were trying to manage and align. And so a lot of it is cleanup to eliminate any conflicts. And then the other is just governance discussions that the Open Space and Trails Board had after the reorganization about, the Open Space and Trails Board operating more in a policy role and such, consistent with the charter. So you're going to see a lot of cleanup. There will actually be a lot of amendments, but I don't think any of them should be too much of a surprise. But the Open Space and Trails Board had a retreat. They talked about those. Staff has been working on the revisions, and they're ready to bring those forward.
I just didn't know if it was worthy of a work session discussion before we have it on a first reading on a regular meeting. If
I
there's
see.
that many changes and we haven't really discussed it
Yeah.
in months, I didn't know if the board wanted to
Brief
do a little
refresher.
preview and discussion before we went to first read.
We could certainly look for a
If
time.
that's up to George, what do you think, George?
Well,
I mean, it kind of caught me off that,
I mean, we have looked at this. It's just more of a refresher, and I wonder if, is this a 2-read anyway?
it is a two.
Yeah,
it
I
is
believe it's a
two-read.
2-read.
It's a 2-read, so. I mean,
It could be lengthy if there's a lot of changes.
I don't think there's that many changes.
I think it's a lot of text changes, but
Yeah.
substantively, it's not going to.
I just have had a concern raised by a member of the public as to, I don't know, they must have watched the meetings or come to the meetings about, just brings it to mind to me, that is Open Space and Trails Board trying to usurp more power over the Board of County Commissioners, and I want to make sure that, yeah, you know how the public is out there, and that's a concern of the public.
In fact, that's a legitimate concern, and we're happy to do a work session. A lot of what we did was that kind of cleanup in terms of establishing clear roles and responsibilities, because I do think they're probably going the other direction, that there's more crossover into areas where you guys really have final say.
I also think that's the meeting where we have the Redstone issue come back, so I just am looking at
That's gonna be a long
timeliness. So to me, it would be worth maybe us having a little, just a
We'd be happy to do a
discussion.
work session.
Yeah, rather than a lengthy discussion at
You know,
first read.
Just trying to think of, because I think both concerns are legitimate, the length of that meeting and so on. Perhaps the agenda item could be included just as a FYI in our regular work session packet, and then if any of us could ask specific questions that we would like to have answered at the first reading. And that way it would be prep, and, things certainly come up at the last minute to ask as well, but, because normally you get your packet on Friday over the weekend, and then your first reading's on Wednesday, but that's what I'm saying, if we could get the packet that's going to be those changes, the Tuesday work session before the week of the Wednesday regular, then any questions our board wanted to have answered more fully at first reading could be fairly quickly done, as opposed to a longer conversation when we already have a long agenda.
Well, that's one way, but I think we'll still have a long agenda. They'll just have the questions ahead of time.
I think if it's the desire of the board, we should just set up some work session time. We can go through the changes
hour.
with you, and then if there are additional
Board
questions,
wants it, that's fine.
yeah.
Okay.
So,
I'd rather have it ahead of time than at the first read.
Anything else on future agendas, anybody?
Nope, thanks, that's all I have.
All right, why don't we flip-flop this, since we've got staff here, and we're timing is ready for the 2018 budget with the Financial Advisory Board economic assumptions, and then we'll follow that up with our open discussion.
Okay.
Too much iced tea. Both Rachel and I are leaving the room.
Maybe we need a couple minutes here, George. I think we lost a quorum.
Okay, well, it'd be nice to know before everyone departs that you're going to do that. Let's take a 10-minute break.
you walked up. Hey, what's going on? Nice to see you. I called you back a couple of weeks ago.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to move on to our 2018 Budget Financial Advisory Board Economic Assumptions.
Thank you very much. My name is Andrea, Finance Director. I am tasked by the Home Rule Charter to convene the Financial Advisory Board for the purposes of reviewing the economic assumptions to be used for the following year's budget. And so, therefore, with me, I have Connie Baker, the Budget Director, Tom Okin, Treasurer, who spends a lot of time into determining, helping us decide the economic assumptions, and then one of our board members, Pete Laris of the Financial Advisory Board. The Financial Advisory Board met on August 30th and had a energetic hour-and-a-half long discussion about some of the economic assumptions that Tom had prepared in advance. And so I will let Tom go through those and tell us about what happened in the meeting.
Sure. You have a table, and I guess we don't have it up. We don't necessarily, but in your packet is a table of all our assumptions, and so the economic factors we try to forecast are a couple flavors of inflation, our property tax growth, our investment earnings rate, sales tax growth from year to year, and community development fee growth from year to year. Basically, all those revenues account for more than 60% of the general fund budget. So, and property tax and sales tax are really the biggies, so we'll talk mostly about those when we get to them. To do our projections for many of these factors, we just turn to professional economic forecasters and see what they have to say, average their forecasts and say, does that look okay? The FAB and staff pretty much say, yeah. You know, we aren't any better than them. So that's what you see. The first item that we're trying to forecast is the Denver Boulder Consumer Price Index. And there we have two state agencies that make forecasts for us. So for this year, the average of their forecast is 3% increase. For last year, it was 2.8%, and actually it came in at 2.8%. So we were pretty good last year. Going out, it's 2.6% in 2018 and 2.5%. And they don't forecast beyond that, so we use the next forecast for the U.S. CPI for those out years. But if you look at it compared to our forecast last year, these are a little higher forecasts for inflation. So 3% this year versus 2.5%. This year is significant because, as we'll explain in a second when we get to property tax, it's this year's inflation that controls how much property tax we can collect next year. So that's up from last year, 2.6% for next year versus 2.2% previously, and 2.5 versus 2.2 after that. So a little bit higher than last year's forecast. The U.S. CPI-U is, again, the forecast last year was for 1.3%, and that is exactly what it came in at. The forecasts for the future are pretty similar to last year's, all 2.2%, 2.3%. No big change there, so not much to discuss. Property tax. So for property tax in the general fund, we are allowed to increase property tax by the rate of inflation as measured by the Denver Boulder CPI-U in the prior year, and actual new construction or growth in the property tax base. And so the assessor's office just gave us the August preliminary assessed valuations for the county, and in there was a 1.5% new construction growth factor added to that. So that's what's in the 2018 column for growth is 1.5%. That's higher than we've seen recently, much higher, double what it was back in, 13, 14, 15 even. But looking forward, we're projecting another 1.5% in 2019, then even more, 1.7% in 2020, before dropping down to 1.4% and then 1.1. What's going on there is basically to get added to the property tax base, say for this year right now, the new construction had to be complete and in service by January 1 of this year. And so then it gets added to the property tax base this year, and we get to collect the revenue next year. So there's a 2-year lag actually from construction completion to where we see an impact on property tax revenue. So we're looking at, like Base Village in the future, all that construction coming on. That's what leads to the 1.7% in 2020. But there's a lot right now going on construction-wise that makes us pretty confident we'll see 1.5% next year. So that's where those figures are coming from. Then if you add the prior year projection for the Consumer Price Index, Denver Boulder, so for next year we're saying 1.5% construction and then 3% inflation. So we have a total 4.5% projected increase in property tax for next year. And last year at this time, we were only forecasting 3.8%. Lower construction, we thought, actually, and lower inflation a year ago. So, and the numbers going forward continue to be larger than last year's projection. So that's good news on the revenue side for the budget. Slight increases there should help us. Investment earnings rate, we look at the 91-day Treasury bill forecasts because most of our money is invested fairly short-term for our cash management purposes. The projections there are averaged and are higher than they were last year. Quite a bit higher, actually, because interest rates have started to move up, and the forecasts are for them to continue to move up. We usually earn more than the 91-day T-bill rate, but in our forecast, I'm starting to reduce that spread until in 2019, we're only forecasting the U.S. Treasury bill rate as our earnings rate. The reason for that is that really our longer-term investments are from fund balance. And specifically for the general fund, we're using fund balance. So there isn't going to be as much to invest longer term. We'll be investing short term more down towards that Treasury bill rate. So I'm staying a little conservative there as well, also because I think these projections might be a little high, although, I mean, a 3% return is not really high by historical standards. It's very high by recent standards, though, so we'll see. That's what's in that forecast. More interesting, sales tax forecast. You can see in the past we've kind of bounced around here since 2011, up 7.5, up 2.9, up 6.9, up 8.5, up 7.7. Last year up 3.6%, and we had forecast a 3% increase last year, so we did better than our forecast. For this year, and if you compare up above to U.S. retail sales, state of Colorado retail sales, and to travel expenditures in the U.S., which are forecast out by the U.S. Travel Association, you can see that in last year we did better than national retail sales, less than statewide retail sales, and significantly better than the actual increase in travel expenditures across the U.S. But that's varied in the past. Some years we're up, some years we're below everybody. So those aren't necessarily the greatest predictor for us. We had forecast a 3.1% increase for next year. For this year, compared to a 2.5% forecast for this year made last year. And then 2.4% for next year, and then 3.25% for the out years, which is what we had basically forecast last year at this time. So we're kind of coming down to this 3% range. And looking at this year's forecast, we have not most of the year, but more than half of the year in. And so you'd think, well, we should be able to forecast that pretty well. There's another sheet attached that shows all our monthly sales tax collections since 2011. But and if you look at 2017, this year, in January it was up 2.9%. February was down 0.4%. This is all from 2016. March was up 13.6%. Guess what? We had the World Cup finals in March. That's a huge increase. April, down 19.2%. I don't know, it got pretty warm. People just quit coming. They all came in March or something. 5.1% growth in May. June then was up 10%. And so we were forecasting for July a 4% increase, 3% for August. September and October we were saying 0% because of the Glenwood Bridge being out. Then coming back some in November, 3% up, and 4% up in December. If that occurred, we would be 3.1% up for the year. Yesterday we got July's actual, and instead of being up 4%, we were down 2.7%. If we substitute that number up there but keep the rest of the forecast intact, this year's increase drops to 2.4%, and that is exactly where we are year to date this year through July, as we're up 2.4%. And looking forward, we had projected 2.4% for next year too. Basically, what we were doing is saying, let's go with our 3.25% for most of the normal months, but like for March, where we had such a huge increase this year, we went back 2 years as the base and said, okay, let's go up 6.5% over 2 years from 2016 rather than inflating from this year's number that's up 13.6%. Same thing we did for September and October. Since we were going to 0 for this year, we went back 2 years and did 6.5%. Putting all that together, that's how we came up with 2.4% for next year. That's our best shot right now. And actually, the July figure is news to the Financial Advisory Board as well, because we didn't have that figure when we met. So I was thinking 3.1% sounded pretty good back then. Not so good anymore.
So Tom, I sort of was following that, but because we had forecasts on the sales 2.5, and what you're saying is we may end up at 3.1 this year for 2017. And then based on this information, we're dropping a projection for 2018 to 2.4%, and then it bumps back up to 3.25% for the following years. I'm missing something. Why we're seeing that one drop for next year and then it bounces back up? Because these numbers are also not only going to be utilized for our budget, but we're going to be passing this on for the RAFTA budget as well, as they're looking at their budget, getting the information from all the different jurisdictions.
Yeah, 3.25 was kind of adapted last year as our best shot long term at what rate, we were, starting to come down to, because we had been growing at easily twice that rate in the, 7% range, high 6% range previously. But, if you're thinking long term, our economy was recovering for several years out of the recession, but at some point, unless we really increase the bed base, which there is some coming on board, but we don't have that much capacity to really grow, and so what you're seeing is some growth and some inflation in prices. Significantly, they've said the hotels have been able to raise room rates pretty substantially here in the last few years, and that helps. But going forward, we're just being what we feel is fairly conservative at that 3.25% level. The reason for the drop to 2.4% next year is really because you're coming off of some months that had much higher increases this year, and if we only apply that 3.25% when February or like June was up 10%, then it brings it down below 3.25% for the whole thing.
So what's the difference if, let's say, what would the difference be in 0.5% in terms of revenues? So if we're off by 0.5% conservatively, because how?
1% is $89,000.
What is it? I'm sorry.
1% is $89,000. So
1% is $89,000. Okay.
Yeah, so that's
half
not
a
use
percent
tax.
would be 45.
Yeah. Are you talking about for the county or for RAFTA, George?
For the county.
For the county. That's the general fund for the county.
Right.
part of our thinking also was, or part of our discussion was the Sky Hotel now no longer being available, and those beds wouldn't be replaced for several years, and didn't see anything else coming on in the next couple of years to replace that.
Yeah, the challenge with sales tax is it's elastic, right? It responds pretty quickly to change, like the Sky Hotel or such. And so within this 5-year projection, we're going to see years that are higher. We're probably going to see years that are lower. And so if I remember correctly, the 3.25 came out of a longer-term historical average. I would say we either took a 15 or 20-year kind of look back. And over time, through the highs and through the lows, it kind of averaged out to that 3.25. Very, very difficult to look, with any precision in that 5 years. So we try and take a 1 or 2 year look at what we think might cause the ups or downs, particularly for the upcoming budget year. And then we tend to apply that longer term average. And so what will happen is as we go into next year for 19 budget planning, you'll probably see that number move again, depending on what economic circumstances are, but you'll see some kind of long-term average floating out there in the out years. And it just keeps us from overstretching on, because we had a good year, you put 5 years in based on that, it tends to inflate your budget a lot more than maybe is realistic.
Yeah, because again, these assumptions go beyond just our budget, not only for RAFTA, but you'll be presenting this information to the OTC as well in terms of budget forecast. So it has other implications.
Tax projection.
Absolutely, but I think the explanation is that highly elastic. We're projecting with confidence 12 months out, and then we're using a historical average, which we think within that 5-year frame will probably hit. So,
yeah. Question, Steve?
So stock analysts will use a 200-day moving average when they're comparing stocks, and this is kind of a similar process where you're looking at what's the average, like the rolling average over a, say, 5-year period or something, and we don't want to deviate too far from that in our prediction because chances are it's going to be pretty close to that.
It's gonna, yeah.
Yeah, although, I mean, we never forecast a downturn.
Yeah.
And they happen. So, and we're pretty long in this recovery, and it's been fairly slow recovery, so maybe that's why it's so long, but at some time we're going to have another recession. An interesting predictor for us, although not real exact in terms of amount, is every year the U.S. stock market has been up. The following year, we've had an increase in sales tax. Every year it's been down. The following year, sales tax has decreased for us.
No money in the
but
pocket,
there's
money
no
in the
correlation between the move up or down, just the direction.
And I would also, and I'll get to Greg next, but I would also say that real estate, at least in the Aspen market specifically, will probably see a correction because there's so much speculation going on just in the Aspen market itself. So this is being reflected in that as well, assuming that there's going to be a correction for property taxes?
No, because our property tax is not based on what the value is. Actually, in revaluation years, like right now, we have a revaluation that our values are going up about 5% or 5.5% due to the market adjustment over a 2-year period. And actually, I think the actual values went up 16%, but assessed value only went up 5.5%. But that doesn't dictate how much property tax revenue the general fund gets. It goes back to how much of that is real growth, which is 1.5%, and how much was inflation in the prior year. That's what we're limited to. So, I mean, there were years when valuation went up 20%. We couldn't take a 20% property tax increase in the general fund. There are districts that can and do because they have voter approval for an absolutely fixed mill levy. So they can go up 20%, but they then also go down by whatever the decrease was when market values went down in the recession too. They go back down, but that's not the county's general fund.
Okay, thanks. Greg, then Rachel?
I was just thinking back to the sales tax, the hotel. Ann mentioned that, with Sky Hotel going offline, you may have seen a dip related to that. Are you able to track the disruption from the short-term rentals in homes, for instance, that's coming up, the VRBO effect and things like that? Because it seems to me we have a lot more beds now than we did 5 or 10 years ago, and some and many, I think, are paying tax. And I'm wondering, are you able to track that and see any sort of bump from it?
I can't say that we've tried to track it exactly. No one's really, I don't think, has analyzed our sales tax returns.
Our sales tax
precisely
gets distributed to us by the state. So I think we'd have to go back to the state for that question. See if they could analyze it better on an industry basis.
I'm just thinking, yeah, if you can anticipate that maybe a hotel going offline makes a difference, then it goes to
It's
read
the
to be able
slack
to
being
see
picked
something.
up.
Right.
Yeah.
I think some of our
Aspen.
I think some of our challenge there is that a lot of that economy on the VRBOs and such, we're not necessarily, even though we could and should be collecting the lodge tax and those sorts of things on those, we're just not capturing all of those. They're kind of, we're still working through systematically how do we do that. And so, where we get the bump is the people that come and stay and utilize those VRBO type things and then are going into town and spending money. However, I think we've had a long enough run of these, particularly in the last 5 to 7 years, that we're probably already getting that impact with the numbers that make up the base that we're now applying our percentage off of. So I think we've captured them, even though we don't know exactly what that number
Can't
really
measure
is.
them, but we're getting them.
And Snowmass and Aspen both collect their own sales tax, which makes up 80% or more of our sales tax base, and they both actively enforce on those rentals. So I'd expect that, as John was saying, they've already captured a lot of that for us, and we aren't seeing a big bump of additional rentals coming online.
Rachel?
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that, Greg. That was one of the things I wanted to bring up. And I would just, if to the extent, Ann, and you may have already checked into this, Summit County and Breckenridge as a town and municipality have done a lot of work on trying to make sure people are really paying the appropriate taxes and collecting those and things like that. And so I think it is a matter of fairness, to the extent possible, we start to ramp our systems up to collect the appropriate sales taxes and taxes on those beds in the county. And it's one thing to capture their potential sales in the city and buying things at a restaurant or store, but it still is something that they should be paying the appropriate taxes from their rental. So I'd like to see us begin to figure out ways to do that. I'm sure other than building a new building and a few other million things, it's just right on the top of the list. It is a matter of fairness, and I think it's very appropriate. And the other side of that is that as you're starting to do that, your interior of your house becomes subject to personal property tax, because these are the accoutrements and furnishings to charge $300 a night. So whether it's your artwork or your paintings or whatever. And so I think that is just something we need to be on top of for property tax purposes as well, personal property tax. I had 2 questions beyond that. One is that it may just be the wording in the memo, and it says, thus, property tax is projected to increase by these percentages. And I think that should be potential property tax, because in the past the board has decided not to collect the full amount we are able to for a variety of reasons, like in the Depression. But I'm wondering, do those numbers then also match up with Pitkin County's Fenton Amendment of what we are allowed to collect?
They don't match up because the Fenton Amendment calculates the maximum amount in a different way using the October U.S. CPI. So we haven't actually got that number yet, so we can't calculate it, but it's also cumulative. Mm-hmm. So typically the Tabor restriction, which is the one we have in here, is the most restrictive of all. Okay, I was just wondering, because I know there's been a little interplay between the two as to which year which is most restrictive. So we will be checking that, obviously. Yeah, when we get the numbers. Okay. And then the other thing you correctly mentioned was the amount that we're allowed to increase by Tabor is not necessarily the amount that we'll actually end up levying, because there'll be a credits applied from previous years, because we always overestimate, because it's always an estimate for the CPI number. We always overestimate to make sure that we collect the maximum amount, but then we always have to refund part of it the following year. So the numbers that will actually appear as the property tax revenues for 2018 will not be necessarily that number.
Yeah. Well, and I think we all know this is a guidance document, a little bit of a roadmap you try to follow, and then things bump in the road. So we go with that. The last question is just something for me for clarification, and I'm just kind of drawing a blank on it, I guess. But on sales tax, I know that if someone purchases expensive piece of jewelry and they're shipping it out of city limits, they don't have to pay the city sales tax. And that can be as close as shipping from City of Aspen to Red Mountain. But is there then county tax of some sort that's collected on Red Mountain? Or is it just the state tax is all that's collected at the point of sale, and it's just, lesser taxes? I'm just kind of wondering, because, I mean, it's one thing to say it's being shipped out of state to Texas and these sort of places, but anywhere, if it leaves municipal lines, you can't collect municipal sales tax.
Yeah, if it's still within the county, the retailer would collect county tax on it.
Okay, but if they were shipped down to the Frying Pan in Elgibel, and they just had purchased $10,000 worth of artwork in Aspen, they don't pay any.
They would submit sales tax to Eagle County,
Okay.
or for Eagle County.
Yeah, I'm just kind of wondering, are we getting the collections that are due Pitkin County for things that, quote, may be shipped out of municipal limits?
So this is one of the challenges of the state doing our collections, is we do not have control over that process. Now, some counties have entered into agreements with Department of Revenue to do audits at the county's expense of those sales tax collections. And from time to time, those have revealed some interesting things, and sometimes they haven't played in those counties' favors. But it is, if there is an interest in really looking at those collections and processes, that would have to be a conversation with the State Department of Revenue and whether they'd be willing to enter into an intergovernmental agreement to allow us to do that.
And Rachel, I believe it's my understanding that if you ship out of state, you pay no state or local tax. If you ship to another county, you don't pay that county's tax. You would pay Pitkin County, but if you're shipping it out of Pitkin County, you pay no City of Aspen or county tax.
Yeah, well,
there's different buttons on the cash register.
Yeah, it is. It's very, very confusing, and we have about the most confusing state system for taxation that there is what I've been told before. But I'm just wondering, maybe we could drill down on that question, and what are we doing, and should we do a further move next year during a work session?
The City of Aspen does occasionally audit.
Oh, yeah, they do.
They have almost on a historic basis.
They do between 4 and 10 businesses a year to make sure they're not just shipping cardboard boxes and the person walks out with the ring on the hand and doesn't pay the sales tax.
Yeah, and they're doing their own collections.
And counties are not allowed to self-collect by state law.
Correct.
All right, well, good question and good things for perhaps down the road to follow up on.
Thank you.
Okay.
So are we willing to accept these
Well,
recommendations?
we're not quite done.
We have one more to discuss,
Right.
Which is community development fees, which amount to 10% of the budget or so, a revenue budget. They're fairly interesting. Maybe I'll let Connie discuss those since she's the expert.
Say expert.
Right.
So, as you know from our discussions in last year's budget process, we really see some very large swings in ups and downs with the community development fees. The board has worked on establishing a flat fee, which hopefully will maintain a better historical level of keeping revenues on par with the expenditures of the Community Development Department. So that flat fee was set at 2.7% towards the end of, or actually at the beginning of this year.
Yeah, it took effect the end of the first quarter.
Okay.
Yeah. Last 2000.
And however, the beginning of 2016, we really saw quite a drop. It seemed like revenues were coming in slowly, but they've since picked up. Last year, we saw a very significant drop in community development fees, down almost $900,000 in 2016. This year, after a slow start in the first quarter, they are picking up and are forecasted to come in much higher. You see on the chart there a 45% increase. That's after the significant decrease last year. So we do expect to see strong revenues this year. And then for out years, we are using, again, similar to sales tax, kind of an average projection of 5%. That 5% does include the fact that construction costs increase faster than other inflationary costs in our forecasts. Prior years, we had set that at double the consumer price index. We've since backed off of that. It was 6.6 in some other years, in the out years. We've backed off that a little to a more moderate 5% increase for the out years. I've had some recent discussions with Brian Paul and where he sees his revenues as he's been going in and looking at projections for 2017, where he sees that going in 2018, and he feels comfortable with the numbers both for 2017 and 2018. And then again, after 2018, 19 and beyond is really just an average.
Okay, questions on that? So I'm just curious, Pete, I mean, when the Financial Advisory Board meets or met on this, you pretty much had the same conversation, or how do your conversations go?
As you guys appointed me to the FAB this summer, so this was my very first meeting, and I was quite impressed, really. The individuals on the Financial Advisory Board are all very talented financial people who come from different kinds of backgrounds. So some people had a little more to say about some of these assumptions, and conversely, others were more aware of some of the other. We got prep material like a week or 10 days ahead of time. Everyone did their homework. And Tom is the veteran at this, and we used this sheet. This was the primary sheet, and we had some other supplemental information. And we walked through, and we probably spent 15 or 20 minutes on each one of these categories. No one was shy to ask questions. Sometimes we didn't understand exactly where these assumptions were used in the budget process, for example, so staff was excellent at explaining the fund, how that fund assumptions work, and how these will ultimately be implemented into the budgeting process. So I thought it was excellent, really. Does that help?
Yeah, good. Yeah, I knew this was your first year.
You know you're going to be wrong. You know the old saying: you put 10 economists in a room and ask them about assumptions like this, and you're going to get 20 different answers.
Mm-hmm. At least.
At least. And so I think staff has very logical, very defensible reasons for using the assumptions or coming to these assumptions. We talked about, I think we spent a lot of time on the interest rate assumption with some interest that were too low. Shouldn't we push a little higher? And we spent quite a bit of time on that, and then came back to it doesn't have that big an impact on the total budget. So why push yourself out on a limb if you really don't have any better reasons for the new number than the old number? So
right.
It was excellent, really.
Good.
And you ought to feel good about staff and how they approach the process, at least as we've seen it so far. And I would just put a plug in for the FAB. I was impressed with my fellow FAB folks, and think about, are there other things you could use us for? Because that can help you from time to time, just knowing that you have some independent eyes coming in and looking at things. And I would think the community would find that a very valuable step or process if you'd had some uses for us. And I think we were going to explore some of those with Ann.
Like transportation funding.
Good. Yeah, great. Well, thanks, Pete, for your...
SS for the ballot question next season.
That's a really good idea.
For Healthy Community Fund.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Pete. So with that, any other questions, or is the board comfortable with using these numbers to move forward?
I've learned that it's as much as you'd like to say, oh, we're going to have all this money coming in, it's better to be on the conservative side and be surprised at the end of the day. And it's a much better position, I think, to put all of us in. And so my question is so if we make this decision, we don't have to see any more budget stuff, right? We're done?
After December
24th.
22nd, you will not have to see any more budget stuff if you
Until
adopt these.
next year. This was great stuff, and I appreciate the effort that goes in with the FAB. You know, we so appreciate our boards and the effort and the commitment that people put in, and the fact that they really do care about the jobs that they do for the volunteering that they do for Pitkin County.
Yeah. Rachel?
Yeah, I was going to thank you too, Peter, for showing up today, as well as the work prior. And like Patty, I think these numbers are, you know, kind of middle of the road conservative. We're not cranking it down so far that we're going to not fund programs or not build them into the 5-year plan, but we're not head in the clouds either, anticipating and starting to fund things that we can't afford over the 5-year program. So it keeps the entire budget process tight, and it's a very important step. Thank you all.
I'm comfortable moving on.
Everybody else comfortable moving this on? Great. Well, thank you all.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Looks like you're all having too much fun.
Sheets
And
of
I would
numbers.
just add
Yeah.
that we will continue to review these numbers. You know, there might be sort of late-breaking information that comes out. For example, the hurricanes may affect the consumer price index over the next couple of months. So we'll keep monitoring and keep you apprised of any changes.
Can I ask a real quick?
Sure.
Why do you think the July numbers came in so low? I mean, what do we think happened in July? The bridge wasn't closed yet.
We went back and looked actually this afternoon and delved into some of the numbers and looked to make sure that we had received from the state all of our major taxpayers, that there wasn't a large refund, which can happen, and in fact our refunds were less in July than they were in June. Tom mentioned maybe the 4th of July being on Tuesday.
But it was packed.
Yeah. The thing
Yeah,
that
I looked at that timing again. It was only a day later, so
And it was-
I don't think.
I was kind of thinking it might have related to not having the pro bike challenge, because a lot of those people arrive way early for training and for setting up and their
Is that in
booth
July?
space. And, you know, it was a pretty, I mean, I know it happened in August, but the prep for that was a lot earlier than that.
Yeah.
City of Aspen's numbers were also down. Snowmass was up, but I believe that was because they had the Enduro Worlds mountain bike
Events,
races,
yeah.
which were a pretty big event for them. That
Can't
they didn't
imagine
have
we
in
could
the
pack any more
previous year.
events into July or any other month in the summer. Yeah, interesting. Okay, if you hear anything, it'd be interesting to know.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
So let's move on to open discussion, John.
Yeah, I just have one item for you, and as a practical matter, the board has really, I think, already decided this, but CCI is putting its legislative committees together, and it requires that the board designate a committee member. Previously, the board had already appointed Rachel and Steve, of course, to represent the board at CCI. I think Rachel and Steve have talked about this, and we're going to designate Rachel as the legislative committee member, and then if for any reason, once this document it needs to be signed by you, George, which is why I wanted to bring it back to at least open discussion and get the nod of heads. And then if for any reason Rachel can't make any of those legislative committee meetings, she has the ability to designate an alternate, which would be Steve in this case.
Yeah, and I think actually there's almost two different designations that happen. This first one is for finalizing the legislative agenda, and then when we go to the policy committee meetings, you also designate alternates and primaries, and that's where Steve and I pick individual
Nan comes
steering
in.
committees to be the primary voter
We
on.
have Nan in there, too.
Right. Good.
Not in this.
Okay.
Second.
Everyone comfortable with that?
Yeah.
So I've got
Great.
the form here for you to sign, George.
All right.
before
Super.
we-
That's it for you.
That's all I've got.
Anything else? Open discussion for anybody? Rachel?
I have a couple of small or relatively small ones. First, there's a new bill that's been introduced into Congress, and I'm sitting here trying to find the bill number. It's from Wyoming Representative Cheney, and it seeks to put oil and gas development into state hands so that whatever land, public lands, it's not a transfer of public lands, but once you've given it to the state to manage it and have a 100-year lease, it's kind of the same thing. And so you'd end up with a patchwork quilt of different development regs or methane capture regs across the West, rather than have the federal government doing EISs. And I thought about this while we were talking about open space and trails and that extensive work on the Crystal River Trail. The Department of Interior, Zinke, has now issued guidance for environmental impact statements that they should be no longer than 150 pages and be done within a year. And I had to think, I bet that open space and trails, which isn't even an EA, is far more than 150 pages and of documentation and work. So anyhow, I think we need to stay on top of that and write a letter to be able to, let our representatives know how we feel about those items. The second is something that, again, I think we might need to weigh in a little bit with the governor. I brought this very mangled piece of paper back with me from the Club 20 meeting, but there is the FirstNet responders situation. Is different than Eagle Net and everything like that. We've all probably seen some presentations recently at COG and so on. So at some point after 9/11, the feds decided they wanted to make sure all first responders' communication equipment was talking to each other and the whole country was connected. And they bid that out, and you have companies that have developed potential programs who were bidders on it. In the state of Colorado, it was AT&T. And now they've gotten to a point of just about presenting their plans to the state, but the state has to choose whether to go ahead with the contractor who responded to the request for proposals, AT&T, or whether the state wants to build out its network itself. So it's a gubernatorial decision, and I just thought we should pass this along to Cara and Phyllis and our IT department to see if they thought we should weigh in one way or the other. I personally don't have a dog in the fight or know which is best, but it will be a very important system and a lot of money invested in our state.
And it's my understanding that, I applied to be that point person, and Kathy Chandler Henley got appointed, so she would be a good contact for Kara who wanted some inside information.
Oh, great.
She sits on that council or committee or whatever it is at the state level.
Okay. Yeah, they gave a little presentation about this at CCI, and then they just gave it 20, and it's really kind of coming up to a point about which system the governor should choose. So and the one point I've made at both presentations is I want to see FirstNet pursuing cell towers in public lands where we have safety issues like Independence Pass and no coverage, and that they're just sticking to the urban centers. It doesn't do us any good.
There's maybe one county, and Carol will probably know this, that actually did a FirstNet pilot program. It's over, of course, I don't necessarily think it's on the Front Range. It could be, I don't know, somewhere Carol would know. And it would be interesting to see how it worked there. The other problem, of course, is expense, and I don't know if the state has a budget. It's like, this is not like a couple $100, guys. This is big. So I don't even know if the state would be able to pull it off, and how that may override our own first responder or public safety program that we've already instituted.
Yeah.
Which is my belief is what the whole state is going to be using outside of FirstNet. FirstNet sound like a great idea and has never really come to fruition in any state across the country. So
it's very hard to tell what's going to happen.
Greg?
I just wanted to say I think I would support a letter regarding your first point with the Congress bill regarding oil and gas, and then the shorter, smaller EAs. I think we should weigh in on that.
Yeah.
And on the second one, I don't know enough about that. I'd say
I'm just passing it on to staff.
I don't think we have any choice in what Zink came down with.
If we don't feel we want to weigh in, we don't have to, but it just is something that I thought we should look at. And John, for your benefit, the Cheney bill is called the Federal Land Freedom Act.
Interesting name.
Free it up.
Free up those federal lands.
Okay.
And the thing about the EA is, I don't think there's a comment period on it. I think you already made it.
It was just guidance.
So I think more information on the federal lands one, because we'd hate to have every state enforcing things differently, because those kind of issues don't follow state boundaries.
No, they really don't. So
Okay, anybody else?
It's our public land.
Anybody else with open discussion?
I'm good.
All right, then I guess we're done for the day. Thanks, Grassroots. We're back here tomorrow at noon for our regular meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Grassroots.
Thank you. Very good. Thanks, George.